This is Isabel Camage interviewing Predencia Dixon on the 5th of March 2018 at her home in Erdington. Predencia was born in Clarendon, Jamaica in 1955 and migrated to the UK in 1965. Can you tell me about your family's background?
Well, we were a large family, yeah. So there were 9 of us, mom, dad, and 9 children. But we didn't all live in the same house. It's kind of like a thing with Jamaican families that they don't always live together. Because my mum had like 2 children that were not my dad's before they got married, and my dad had 2 children that were not my mum's before they got married. And then they had all the others together. So we would see each other, but we weren't necessarily living in the same house. But we were very much aware that we were 9 of us. I have 4 brothers and 4 sisters. I had 4 brothers and 4 sisters then. Obviously, in the passing of time, some of them have also passed. I'm the youngest. They call, in Jamaica, if you're the youngest, they call you your mother's wash belly. Right? On the basis that you're so close to her that you just get everything that falls from her. To some extent, I probably was my mum's wash belly, but it also meant that I was around after the others left, and then ended up with extra work when they had gone and didn't need to be doing any more. So I've kind of skipped from when I was just my mother's wash belly to when the others have left home. So what else can I tell you? My dad left to come to England when I was 3 years old. And so my mum, who worked as a nurse, my dad was a joiner. He was, what I understand, he was an apprenticed joiner. So, and in Jamaica they called an apprentice joiner a journeyman. It meant he had done the journey. He had done his apprentice and his apprenticeship. And so he was very well paid. He was very well paid in Jamaica, but because of the shortage of skilled labour in England, he came to England and got good jobs because he was very skilled. I think in those days, and maybe now to some extent, the men go off to wherever, and sometimes, as it was with my dad, it was with the intention of making enough money to come back to the family. And then what very often happens in such situations is that after a while they think it may be easier for the family to move here. And I think that's what happened with us. So my mom, because my dad was earning good money, he could send money back for us. And so although my mum was working as an auxiliary nurse, she was able to hire in help for us. So she had a maid and she had someone take care of the children. Yeah. So, but that was only possible because my dad was working here. But if you're married and there's that distance, and it's not exactly ideal. So they decided that she and us would move here. And that's really what happened. The plan was that the children would come first. The children would come to my dad so that they would have one parent in each country. And my dad would have, because there were other relatives here who could help to look after us. And so it was that my older sister was going to come first, and we had the ticket bought for her and everything, and then she died. So she couldn't come. So my brother, the next one down, he came in her place. And I think there was just so much trauma going on that they decided it would be better if my mum came to England because they had a shortage of nurses here. And if she worked here, they could generate enough income for me and my other brother to move here quite quickly. And that's what happened. Yeah. So,
Can you paint me a picture of your early childhood in Jamaica?
Okay. Right. So when we lived in the countryside, which is when we lived in Clarendon, we would, because Clarendon had like lots of sugarcane plantations, so we would get up in the morning and walk maybe a mile and a half through the sugarcanes to school, and then we walk back a mile and a half through the sugarcanes to school, from school back home. So all the children from the village, and in Jamaica we don't call them villages, we call them districts. So all the children from our districts would all go off to school at the same time, and then we'd all come back from school at the same time, because there is actually that, I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to go through cane fields or through wheat fields or whatever, but they rustle in the wind. And there is, especially amongst children, this great fear of duppies, ghosts, right? And all the talk was that all the rustling in the cane fields were duppies, yeah. So if you were the one caught not with a group, the duppies would get you. So everybody would make sure that they were, together when they left and together when they came back. And if for any reason you could not be with the group, you ran all the way home. You just didn't stop for the duppies to get you, And that would happen, kind of. We started school earlier than we do here, so school would start at 8 o'clock in the morning, and then we'd be finished by 3, or 8 till 2:30. Because children do work. When I say work, what I mean is children are responsible for helping to run the household. So we had chores, and even though, like in my household, we would have someone to help, we still had to do chores. So those chores would be done when we came home from school. And also, if you had a homework, you needed to get your homework done. If your parents were very education conscious, your homework would come first and then the work would come afterwards. If they were not, it would be the other way around, and sometimes some children didn't get to do any homework at all. Comparing it with the childhood I had when I came here, we didn't have many toys. We made our own toys. Didn't have any dollies. And to this day, my brother still reminds me of my mango seed dollies. There are different types of mangoes. There are different species of mangoes. And there is a species of mangoes in Jamaica called a hairy mango. And after you've eaten all the flesh, it has this long hair. And so I'd eat all the flesh off, dry the mango out and comb the hair as a dolly's hair. And I would dress it. I'd put clothes on it, and that was, my mango dollies. And as far as I was concerned, they were dolls. I don't think I had a doll till I came to England. My brother, who went into engineering, maybe that says something, he would make trucks and, moving cars and things from cans and tins and bits of wood and whatever, and string. But we didn't in any way feel deprived. Maybe because nobody else had toys, so it was fine. We didn't really get into the toy thing till we got here. So schooling, getting there and back. There was a great emphasis, if I go back to schooling, on the 3 R's, reading, writing and arithmetic. And a lot of it we learnt by rote. I can still say my time's table from when I was 5, because we had to learn it. It was one of the things you did. The alphabet we learnt by rote, all of those. And they just drilled it into you till you got it. If you were clever, that was fine. If you were not clever, unfortunately, sometimes they beat it into you. But again, maybe because our education system was based on the British education system, that was a model that was also in Britain. So we hitting kids in Britain in schools didn't become illegal till the 1980s. So, yeah. So we adopted that model, and so that's something I remembered of being in school there. But that was also something that was here when I came. But we didn't have the rote learning in the same way. One of the maybe I'll talk about that when I come to talking about the move. Or I'll say it now. So one of the things that I noticed immediately when I came here was that for a 10-year-old, the work I was doing in school, I would have been doing when I was 8 in Jamaica. And I was considered very clever here, whereas in Jamaica I was just, that's what was expected of you. There was a certain level of expectation. If you had ability, there was a certain level you were expected to perform at. Whereas when I came here, it just felt like everyone was expected to perform at the same level, which wasn't very high. So really for the first year of being here, I just coasted because I could do the work. I didn't have to actually try too hard. What else can I tell you about life at home?
Do you have any particular friends that you remember?
I had a friend. I can't remember her name now. Isn't that terrible? But because I had brothers and sisters, I didn't really go... I had brothers and sisters to play with, so I didn't really play so much out of the house with my friend. It would have been the journey to and from school. And when I was growing up, I was quite large. I was quite plump. No. And they... sometimes, when you're different, children can be very unkind. And they used to call me Bufu Jumper. Bufu in Jamaica is a frog, yeah. So I was a fat frog. And when everybody else would call me Bufu Jumper, she was the only one who would kind of stick up for me. But it wasn't that kind of friendship where I would have been really, really close. And in fact, maybe throughout my whole life, I've never had that kind of person. Maybe now, maybe in the last 4 or 5 years, I have a friend who is close like that, but not as a child and not most of my adult life.
Can you tell me about moving to Kingston?
I moved to Kingston when I was 5. I don't remember a great deal of the time in Kingston, other than I'd been going to school in the country when I was 3, I think. And then they didn't take... No, I'd already been going to school in the country at 5, and they didn't take children in schools in Kingston till they were 7. A bit like here, you went to school at 7. So my mum had to argue really strongly for me to go to school, and I remember being the youngest in this class that I was in. My mother was working. I think my mother moved to Kingston for work. My dad was already here. She moved there for work, and she moved all of us. We left Kingston because my sister died. That was the reason we left. So that we were there, 5, 6, 7, 8. I was 7 when my sister died, and then we would have left. I might have been 7.5, or because I remember it being 7, and there was lots of talk about whether or not I should be allowed to go to the funeral and all of this. So it was kind of like the time in Kingston feels like a very sad time, because the ending of it was my sister's death. And then that was when my mum came to England. So my brother came to England very quickly because it wasn't his turn. So he had to move very quickly. Then my mother moved, and then we went back to the country, to Clarendon, to stay with one of my aunts till they could save the money up to send for us. And then that was 2 years. We were with my aunt in the country for 2 years before we came here.
So how old were you at the point when you moved back to Kingston?
8. Oh, so when I moved from
Sorry.
Kingston to the country, yeah, I went back when I was 8.
Okay.
So 3 years, 5 to 8. But not, I don't... Kingston was very different to the countryside. It was built up. You went to school on roads. There were no cane fields. There were still duppies, but not in cane fields. There are duppies in Jamaica everywhere. Yeah, there are duppies here as well, actually. Talk to a Jamaican, they will tell you about duppies. But it was a city. You know, we'd come from a small village to a big city. Well, to us it was a big city. And we didn't have the space that we had in the countryside to... Having said I didn't remember much, you know. We didn't have the space that we had in the countryside to roam about and just wander about. So we were watched a bit more. I think there was a feeling that there was a bit more danger in the city for children, so we had to be home and in the house by a certain time, and we couldn't go out. You know, we couldn't just be missing for a while without somebody being concerned about where we were. And say, like in the countryside, a lot of the houses would be built on stilts, whereas in Kingston there were more like solid concretey house on ground level. And so there were those kind of physical differences and safety differences, and not so much space difference.
What was your house like in Clarendon?
It was built on stilts. I remember that. The house, especially, I especially remember my auntie's house. The houses were built on stilts because there could be quite a lot of flooding, and so if it was high up, then you know your house and goods and things were protected. But under the house was where we played. And the aunt we went to live with, we didn't really like her. So we would go and hide under the house. You know, there were times my brother and I, because there were just 2 of us now, and my brother and I would go and basically hang out under the house. And I remember this one time, she was really mad at us for something or other. And he was in the house, and I was under the house. And there were no carpets or anything. And if you imagine, the floorboards would have not been maybe so tight together, so you could hear through the floorboards. And we weren't allowed to talk to each other. So we developed like a sniffing language. And 2 sniffs meant this and 1 sniff meant the other. We would carry out this whole conversation in sniffs because she wouldn't know what that we were talking. She wouldn't know that we were communicating because one of us was being punished. You know, yeah. It was a small house. There was just enough space for my aunt and her husband and us, and we shared a room. And my aunt's husband worked in the sugar cane factory, and I remember he used to bring home because when you're making sugar cane, it goes through various stages. So that there's a first stage where you juice the cane, you get all the juice out of the cane, and it goes from being, because when you see sugarcane, it's white or it's transparent. But when you've extracted the juice, it gets oxidized, and so it goes brown. Yeah, and it just gradually like apple juice, it'll gradually go brown. And he would bring that home. It is absolutely delicious. He would bring that home with him sometimes. And then there's another stage where it goes to where it's like a wet sugar, and we used to call it wet sugar. And he would bring those home in little metal tubs. And we would just scoop it out with our hands and eat it. It was just like it was brown and wet, yeah. And then there's another stage where it goes to where it's molasses, where it's more gooey and whatever. We just loved cane at every stage, the juice, the wet sugar, the molasses, and then it would eventually be turned to sugar.
Are there any other foods that you particularly remember?
Mangoes. Mangoes were then and still are my favourite fruit, yeah. And there is also another fruit called the kneesberry. I never see it here. It looks a bit like kiwi fruit, but inside the flesh is probably a little bit like a kiwi fruit, but not as wet. And the seeds, it has quite big seeds. I can't think of a fruit that's similar. And then there's another fruit called a sugar apple. See, I have teeth problems, Sugar apples. Yeah. Sours. There was actually, no, in Barbados they called them sugar apples, but in Jamaica they called sweet sop, but again sweet. There were sweet sops and sour sops. Sweet sops are very, very sweet, and sour sops are quite sour, but you would use them to make drinks rather than kind of eat them. But they were my favourite.
Can you tell me about the circumstances of your migration?
I think I've said some of it already, in the fact that my mum and dad were already here. One of my brothers was here. The death of my sister, and I think they just wanted to put some distance between the sadness of that and to kind of make a new life here. So they decided that we were too young to travel by ourselves, so they wanted us to come together. My brother was 13 because he's 3 years older than me. By the time my brother was 13, we hated each other. We absolutely hated each other. We fought like cats and dogs. And even on the plane coming here, he was like, I don't know, this really nice person had turned into this horrible wind-up merchant. So the time came for us to leave my aunt's, and there was a part of me anyway that was really, really happy because I thought she was an ogre. She's dead now, so she won't ever hear this. And we got our best clothes. They got really nice clothes for us, and we got our best clothes on, and we got a taxi to take us to the airport, and when we got to the airport, I think the carrier, the aircraft carrier, that was the company, was a BOAC, the British Overseas Airways Corporation. They were, because Jamaica was still a British colony. No, it had just gained its independence just before I left, but it had been a British colony for a long time. So it was a British planes that did a lot of that journey. So we got to the BOAC, never been to an airport in that way where we were going to be the ones travelling. And suddenly it was just like a different experience. We'd seen planes and whatever, but we'd never, we had our little grips. we call suitcases grips. Brown ones, like brown cases, they were almost like hardened cardboard rather than any of the really fancy ones you would get here now. And we were dressed up as though we were going to a wedding or, like church or somewhere special. Because there was a feeling that because our parents, and this didn't just happen to us, it happened with any child who was being sent abroad to their parents. The parents would have sent money for the child to be kitted out. And so the people there would kit you out, like proper dress you up. But something that surprised me was when we got to the airport, all the way there, the night before, I was so excited. We're going on a plane, and we're going to go and see my mum and dad, and it's all going to be great, and I'm going to go in the clouds and everything. I'm leaving this moment behind. We got there, and we were unaccompanied minors, so we had to be taken to a special place, and then came time for us to say goodbye to my auntie. And I don't know what came over me. It was just like, oh no, I don't. For some reason, in my head, that 10-year-old head, it hadn't computed that she wouldn't be coming with us. And then at the point where we had to say goodbye, I was like, no. And I then didn't want to. I wanted to come, but not to leave her behind. A therapist would have something to say about that, after all these years of, she's the most horrible person on earth. But she must have taken care of us. It's that person you push against who's trying to control you in some way. And but that scene at the airport for me was unexpected. But going back to my brother, there were things after, obviously, we had to leave. We got on the plane. They fed us. Obviously, you get food on the plane. It's a long flight. And there was food there that we'd never seen. Now, you have green peas here, like the little green peas. We have a vegetable like that in Jamaica. It's called susumba. It is the bitterest thing in the world, right? And you basically give it to people who have stomach aches. It's some people like it as a vegetable. It's just, but as children, if you saw susumba on your plate, you would try to scrape them off or whatever. And the way we cook meat, we wouldn't ever, like how you do steak, it's just a bit of meat, and it probably doesn't have any gravy, or it's not cooked in a stew or whatever. So I think what we got on the plane was beef and peas and potatoes, but not a dish we would ever recognise, because we hadn't ever eaten food presented in that way. And my brother, as soon as he saw the peas, he kept saying, "That's susumba, that's susumba, that's susumba." He says, "You're not going to eat that, are you? You're not going to eat that susumba." I didn't even try them because I was convinced. And then I started to play about with the meat. And he says, "It's horse meat, don't you?" I said, "No, they wouldn't give us horse meat." "Yeah, it's horse meat. They've given us horse meat and susumba." So I think we just ate the potatoes because he'd convinced me. I'm pretty certain it was beef. He'd convinced me the beef was horse meat and the peas was susumba. Only when I came here then did I think, that's actually what it was. But he took such joy in doing that. It was a long flight. By the time we landed, I was then excited to meet my parents because I hadn't seen them in a while. And a new place, we'd heard so much about England. It was, well, certainly for my family anyway, because of the financial situation we were in, because my parents were here. As far as I was concerned, this was the land paved with gold, that we were coming to Anyway, we arrived. My parents came to meet us. We arrived on the 28th of September. I was not expecting the cold, but my parents were. So they brought coats to the airport with them. They must have, somebody must have sent them our sizes, because the coats were kind of like the right sizes. And I remember very vividly to this day that they had brought me a red duffel coat, a bright red duffel coat. And I absolutely loved it. I'd never had an item of clothing like this before. Never had a coat, never had anything in that kind of red, these toggles and it, and a hood. It was just beautiful. And I wore it everywhere. And I think for the first year of being here, everybody called me Little Red Riding Hood. And I loved it. I love the fact that, I was called that, and I was so disappointed when I outgrew that coat and I couldn't wear it anymore. Yeah. But that was one of my very first memories of arriving. I hadn't seen my dad in a much longer time than my mum. So when I saw him at the airport, it felt like I was kind of meeting a stranger. Whereas my mum was just mum, because it had only been 2 years. And even though 2 years is a long time in a child's life, it's a lot longer than however long my dad had been here. And on the drive from the airport to our house, my brother and I just kept saying, wow, there are a lot of factories here. In Jamaica, the only buildings made of bricks are factories. The factory. So we're looking out the windows. We're going past. We're like, and of course, these big brick buildings with chimneys on top, with stuff coming out, and we're like, wow, it's just like England's just all factories. And then we pulled up outside this house, and we realised we were going to live in one of these factories. And I was like, no, this is how all the houses are. I was extremely disappointed. I was extremely disappointed. If you have money in Jamaica, you have a big house with bright colours and lots of bright foliage around your house. So the weather was dark, the buildings were dark, and it didn't feel to us like this was the kind of living that we were expecting. Also, wasn't expecting the fact that there was a fire in the house. So it was like a coal fire. You had to make this fire every day. That was like what you did in factories. Because obviously in Jamaica you'd never ever need to make a fire in your house to keep it warm. You'd make fires, yes, if you didn't have like a cooker in your house, and so lots of people didn't then. You would make a fire outside and cook your food on it, but not to keep you warm inside. So that whole transition from heat to cold and having to wear warm clothes, and never being able to, just kind of go out in the sunshine. Or the sun would shine, but it wouldn't be warm. That was like a weird thing. If the sun was shining in Jamaica, it would be hot. So when we saw sun here, then we went out and it wasn't warm. That was just like some kind of, misnomer, really. That shouldn't happen. So those things, were really big kind of, culture shock. The other big thing I remembered, I think it snowed that year when we came. And I was absolutely fascinated by snow. It was, we had been told about snow. And then one time it hailed. And we were like, it's snowing, it's snowing, it's snowing. It was like, no, it's not snowing, it's hail. Right? That isn't snow. I was like, yes, it was. I think my mum came home, we were saying, yes, it was snowing. And she said, no, it wasn't snowing, it was hail. Yes, it was snowing. I said, no, you will know when it snows. And then it snowed. and we did. It was lovely. It was absolutely lovely. Till the next day when it was really cold. And we would just go and stand out in the snow and let it fall on us, and put our hands up and just marvel. I don't think if you haven't grown up with it, the first time you see it, it just, and you wonder, how does this happen? Because it then lands on your hands and disappears. Because I had my red duffer coat, it would sit on the duffer coat for a while before it disappeared. So that first time when I saw snow was absolutely magical. And I still like snow when I'm inside looking out on it. I still like it that way.
Did you notice any differences in the way people interact with each other in England?
Yeah. First thing is, we wanted to go and talk to the neighbours. And my mum and dad said, we don't know the neighbours. We're like, what do you mean you don't know the neighbours? You would not be in Jamaica and not know your neighbours. So that was like, because we wanted to know if the neighbours had children that we could play with. And they said, we don't know the neighbours. So that was like a first shock. You can live next door to someone and not know them. And that still continues now, yeah. I know most of my neighbours here, but I don't know the people there. Not all of them, anyway. But that was, we were just like, wow, how can that be? Yeah. But again, you're 10. There are so many new things to absorb, and you kind of get used to it. Other people stayed in a lot. They stayed in the houses a lot. Whereas in Jamaica, most of your life is lived outside of your house. Here, most of your life is lived inside of the house, and you go outside if you're trying to get from A to B. Yeah. So that was like a noticeable difference, that we were having to spend more time in the house. And with a brother who was a wind-up merchant, that was not a good thing for me, because he just found more and more ways to irritate me. So it was good when we went to school, because I was only 10 and I was going to primary school. He was already 13, so he had to go to secondary school. So then I only had to see him in the evenings, yeah, or at weekends. And we had family here, but the socializing always took place in people's houses. So like in Jamaica, you would go to the beach, or you would go to the woods or somewhere. But like I said, a lot of the living happened outside. Here it was moving from people's houses to houses. And then if you went to school, that too was inside. But we kind of understood the weather played a great part in that.
How did you find school in England?
I found it difficult to settle at first. I went to a small primary school, and I don't think there weren't many black children in the school. And I'd gone in age 10, so most of the children would have been at school from they were 7, so they would know each other, and they would have come up together, and they had their they had their cliques already. So I went in the last year of primary school, yeah, and I'd missed the start of primary school. So, they start in the first week in September. I'd arrived the last week of September, and then it took a few weeks for me to get to school. So everything was already settled by the time I got there. And I think there was an assumption made that because I was coming from Jamaica, my standard of education would be low, so they put me in a class that was lower standard than I was used to. But to be fair, they quickly moved me into another class that was more commensurate with the level of my education. But even then, it wasn't a struggle. And I think partly because I told you I was a bit plump when I was little. And then when I came here, we didn't have chocolate in Jamaica. And then I came here and there was chocolate galore. We didn't have pocket money in Jamaica and we didn't have chocolate. I came here and we got pocket money and we got chocolate. I think I just ballooned out. And the children in the school, in Jamaica they call me buffer jumper, here they just call me fatty. Yeah. I had, and I still, it's there latently sometimes, just very occasionally, although it hasn't happened in a while, can have quite a fiery temper, really fiery temper, right? And so if anyone called me a name, I just knock them out, right? Just box them down, knock them out, So I think the only thing that kind of was a bit of a saving grace in school, because I performed well intellectually, I think some of the teachers made some allowances, and I think some of them were aware that there was this attempt to bully me, but I'm not really a bully's dream. It didn't work trying to bully me, because I just flipped the table back. But I remember one playtime being in the centre of a group of children who were trying to fight me, and I just went spinning round like a top, round and round with my arms out, and just knocked them all out as I went round and round. So I didn't really enjoy the first few months of being here in school. I can't remember at what point I settled down, but there was a point, I think, at which I settled down, and I don't know, I can't remember if my parents were called, I don't remember that much, but there was a point, maybe about 6 months in or whatever, when I think things became more bearable and I must have settled down. And then I think I had a few friends. People started. I thought children played such silly games. The things they did. I remember they used to have these twigs, and they had like these collections of twigs, and at playtime they would go and find the twigs and just play with these twigs, and then at the end of playtime they would cover the twigs up again. I was like, well, what is the point of that? What is the point of that? I think I just felt that they were immature. And I didn't really... So there must have been a point where I either, decided this was it and settled. But by the time I left primary school, I felt settled in the system, enough to move to secondary school and, kind of get on with it there.
What were your teenage years like?
Teenage, that's 13 to 17. I continued being fat till I was 14. I say that because I think it had a big impact on how I viewed myself and how I behaved until then. So, and in a weird kind of way, even though I was fat, I was a good runner. Don't know how that worked. But when I moved to secondary school, so that's where I would have turned teenage, and when I was 14, I decided I needed to do something about my weight. So I went to secondary school. I went to the top class in everything, yeah, and I was teacher's pet, so that was fine, yeah. Teachers like children who are academically able. Yeah, there is no denying it. Whatever colour you are, whatever. I don't know how I would have fared if I hadn't been academically able. Yeah. But I was, so I got on well with the teachers. I got on well in sport for some weird reason. At 14, I decided I was going to do something about my weight. And I ordered a book from a magazine, How to Lose Weight Once and For All. And you'd not believe, with all the emphasis they have now on dieting and stuff like that, it came in a brown paper wrapper. It was a kind of book that, would be sent to you in a brown paper wrapper. You wouldn't want anyone to know that you were buying something like this. And I read there that if you did anything for 21 days, you would break a habit. It took 21 days to form a habit and 21 days to break the habit. So I decided I was going to give up chocolate for 21 days and see if it would break the habit. And it did. I'm not a great fan of chocolate anymore. It could, like this chocolate biscuit there has been there from, I can take it or leave it. It doesn't really matter. And then I think I did then start to lose weight. But most of my teenage years were spent working hard in school, getting good grades. I probably had more of an interesting early life than I did in my teenage years, because I was very academic. I was very educationally aware. My parents drilled it into us. That's why we brought you here. There are opportunities here. You must make the best of them. And to be fair, I liked studying. It wasn't a chore. I enjoyed doing what I was doing. So between 13 and 17, I worked hard. I got good grades. At 14, I changed schools. I went from one secondary school to another because the secondary school I was in got closed. It had such a bad reputation, they closed it. Yeah. But I was fine. I liked it there. I was doing okay. And then I moved to another secondary school at 14. And that was all right too. I settled there. And at 17, which would have been, 18 was the last of your teenage years, I was very, very sporty. So school and sport. And so I played netball and rounders, which were the girls' games, then netball and rounders. I was games captain, and when I was 17, I was made deputy head girl of the school. And when the head girl got ill and couldn't carry on with her duties, I stepped in and I was head girl of that school till I left. So I ran for an athletics club called Sale Harriers in Manchester. So it was school, sport, and I went to church till I was 16 and then decided I didn't like that anymore and left. But that was a great rebellion or anything, I'm afraid.
Why did you choose to move to Birmingham?
Okay, I told you that I was really a good school child and I loved English. And when I was 15, we came to Birmingham on a school trip to the MAC, to the Cannon Hill Park, the Midlands Arts Centre, to see a play. And I fell in love with the MAC. I fell in love with Cannon Hill Park. I fell in love with Birmingham. So when it came time for me to, choose a university, choose further education, higher education, this was where I came. Yeah, I'd applied first choice, second choice here. Third choice, I think, was Nottingham, and I can't remember where the other places were, but first and second choices were in Birmingham because I just loved it. And so I actually, when I came to, so that's why I came. There was something about, now I would say there was something about the energy of Birmingham, but at 15 I didn't know that. I just knew that I loved the place. And so I came. When I came to Birmingham, I went to live on Westbourne Road, where the part of Birmingham City University, BCU, the halls of residence. The establishment I came to there was the City of Birmingham College of Education, which was a teacher training college in its own right. And then it changed to being Birmingham Polytechnic, and now it's Birmingham City University, but it's still the same building with the same halls of residence. So I came there and loved being at uni, or college as it was for us then. And one of the other reasons of coming to Birmingham was that I knew that there would be lots of black people here, because I didn't want to go anywhere where I wouldn't have, the opportunity to take part in my own culture. Because by the time I got to 17, I was also clubbing. I forgot that. By the time I was 17, 18, I was clubbing, but I had to be in by 11. Can you imagine 18 and you have to be in by 11? So I thought, well, when I come to Birmingham, I won't have to be in by 11 because there won't be any parents there on the doorstep with a stopwatch going, 10 past 11. It'll be 10 minutes less next time you go out. My dad did that. He did, yeah. I had a boyfriend, and he came to ask my dad if he could take me out. We did that then, right? And my dad said, yes, but you have to get her in for 10 o'clock. And I was like, no, I've been staying out till 11. How can he be getting me in for 10 o'clock? And he did. It didn't last long, because I just thought, if you can't stand up to my dad and bring me home for 11, you're not going to. Anyway, so that was another reason for coming here, because I thought, that would, I would have access to my own cultural activities. Westbourne Road is nowhere near the black activities. And I kept going out and thinking, well, where are all the black people? Where are all the black people? And then one day I got on a number 11 bus, and I just sat on the bus till I started to see posters for black events. And I thought, this is where the black people are. This is where they are. But before I did that, before I got on the number 11 bus, I must have been here for like a couple of months, because I didn't really know anyone in Birmingham. I just came, Before I did that on the number 11 bus, I went out with a couple of students into a couple of places in the city centre. And there were only two, I'm not really a pub person to go out to drink, but because I was a student and, you have to go try these things. And there were two places that I went to in the city centre. One was called the Talk of the Town, and the other was called the Tavern. And one night I was in bed and I had my radio on, and I heard that the IRA had bombed these two places, and so many people had been killed. I've never been out in town. And I just kept thinking, they were the only two places I've ever been to to go out. And so that was like a real big shock for moving to Birmingham, having come here because, this was the energy here was so great. And it really wasn't long after I'd been here that those bombings happened. So and then to some extent, then I either just stayed around, college activities, or I went into the black community because we weren't bombing each other. And, the IRA were not aiming for us, right? And I don't think I've ever regretted coming here. I've been back to Manchester many, many times. And my family still live in Manchester, and they, from time to time, say, you are coming back, aren't you? Yeah, it's like, no. And I have 3 children, and it was really, really interesting that at one time, 2 of them were living in Manchester. One of them had moved there on his way down. He went to university in Durham, and then he moved to Leeds to do his master's, and then he moved to Manchester. And my other son had moved to Manchester to go to university. So 2 of them were living in Manchester. and they were seeing the rest of my family quite regularly, and I would go to see them from time to time. But I've never felt that I'd want to go back to Manchester. Birmingham somehow feels like home. It wasn't the first place I came to, but I've been here 40 years now, about. Yeah.
Can you tell us about your work in Birmingham?
Many and varied. I trained as a teacher, taught in a West Bromwich school taught primary school in Balsall Heath as part of my teaching practice. Then I taught in a school in West Brom. Can't remember where I did my third teaching practice. But by the end of the third teaching practice, I realised that I was not going to teach in a school. I didn't like schools. I didn't like the way teaching was going. And I didn't, but seeing this teaching from the inside, and I taught biology, I taught science, so I would go and put a white coat on every day and teach the same, and I taught secondary school, so I would teach the same lesson 3 times a week, and by the third time I was bored, witless. So I decided I liked teaching, but not in a school. So I went to work in what they call a secure unit, which is like a centre for children who have committed offences. Mad kids or bad kids, we used to call them. Technically, they were there for those children who were a danger to themselves or to others. So we had murderers, rapists, arsonists, muggers, burglars. We had child prostitutes, rent boys. We had children who were self-harmers, who'd swallow batteries or cut themselves up. And that we were a group of professionals put together to try to make sense of why these children did these things. You know, we'd have children as young as 10 who were murderers. And we'd have to try and make sense of why would a 10-year-old murder? Or, you know, why would a 15-year-old girl pour petrol all over a man and set his flat alight and then walk out and go and eat at McDonald's? You know, those kinds of things. I'm fascinated by what goes on in people's heads. And I think that was the right place for me to be at that time. So when it came to doing my master's, I was more interested in the psychology of this. So I went and did my master's in psychology, really to be able to understand what kind of goes on in people's heads. And I did that work for 17 years. I wasn't mad. I love people and I love children. The badder, the better, in a way. My primary school teaching practice was the least interesting because they just did what you told them, more or less. I like people who push back. I think maybe because I'm like that. And in secondary schools, I was the kids who didn't sit there and were just quiet and got on with their work. They were the ones that kind of fired me up a bit because I'd want to help them. So for a long time, I did this work. It's stressful work. It's not really designed for you to be in there more than 5 years, but some people stayed longer. I always knew that I would know when it was time to go. And there was a girl we had, and she was a self-harmer, and she was a cutter, you know. And one night I moved up the ladder there, so I went in as a basic grade worker, and then I went and I moved into management. And as manager, you would need to do on-calls overnight because the place was operated 24/7. And she had cut a hole in her arm that wide. And I'd been called out. I went in, sent some of the other workers to the hospital with her. And when she came back from the hospital, they stitched her up. She opened it up again. And they just had to take her back to the hospital. These are really, really psychologically damaged children. But I knew it was time to leave because for the whole of the next week, every time I closed my eyes, I could see that hole. And I'd seen worse than that in the time I'd been there. But we were told that if this begins to affect you, then it's time for you to go. And the work was so intense in many ways, although we had psychologists working alongside us. As workers, we had a consultant psychiatrist that we could go and see if we felt the work was, too intense for us. Or sometimes because children would be there for things like murder, they would disclose things to us that we had to take somewhere. And sometimes if people's lives were at risk, we would, not just our own mental health, but other people's lives. So we had a resident psychiatrist, and sometimes I would need to go and see her because you can't carry stuff like that and it not affecting you. So that was most of my work in Birmingham.
So do you think you'll stay in Birmingham from now on?
Yeah, well, I keep trying to... There was a point where I tried to leave. I got married in 2009 again and went to live in Kegworth, which is on the border of Derbyshire and Leicestershire. And it didn't work and I came back to Birmingham. Right? So I think Birmingham has a kind of pull. I can't see me living anywhere else in Britain. And I said to people, the only place I would move, because I really like where I live, the only place I would move to if I moved from Erdington is Moseley. Yeah, so I wouldn't even be moving. I wouldn't even be moving from here because I like my home, but there isn't anywhere else. I've worked in after I left that work that I was doing, I had a national job and an international job. So I've travelled all over the... one of my positions was a UK-wide one, so my patch was England, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales. Yeah, and I've travelled for 7.5 years. I spent going all over England, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales. And there isn't anywhere that I've seen that I thought, well, I would want to come and live here instead of Birmingham. And while I was doing that job, it was a godsend to live in Birmingham because there were London-based positions, but because I lived in Birmingham, it meant that if I had to travel anywhere, nowhere was too far. So to get to Scotland, if I was living in London, it would be so much longer again. So anywhere was not too far because I was bang in the middle of the country. So no, I think I might be here. I'm here for the foreseeable future.
So how do you perceive your identity now?
My identity now. I'm still black. Right? I'm still black. It's an interesting one. I'm still black and I'm still Jamaican. I don't see myself as British. Yeah, I have 3 children and they're British. And in fact, one of them is mixed heritage. So that's kind of, we have these conversations, we say, so I was married twice. So I talk to them about how they see their heritage. They're British first and Jamaican second. My eldest son recently got a Jamaican passport, organised it himself, got a Jamaican passport, went to Jamaica and put on Facebook, oh my God, she said, welcome home, right? Because obviously it's not his home, he wasn't born there, but he has a Jamaican passport. Now when I go to Jamaica and they say welcome home, they don't say welcome home to me because I have a British passport. So there's kind of some strange, anomaly going on there where because he travels on a Jamaican passport, they say welcome home to him. Because I travel on a British passport, they don't say welcome home to me. But I think although I love the country, I don't see myself as British. It's kind of interesting. I'm a Jamaican person living here, and I like living here, but I don't think I'm British.
What do you think it means to be a Brummie?
I think it means putting up with a lot of bad press. The number of times I've said to to people, oh, I live in Birmingham. Oh, but you don't have a Brummie accent. And then they try to do a Brummie accent, and they don't sound anything like, but you don't have a Brummie accent. Well, I didn't have a Mancunian accent either. And I think because I spent so much time working all over the place, my children have more of a Brummie accent than I do, because they went to school, they were born here. I think you have more of the accent of where you were born, because that's where you form yourself, and everybody else around you speaks and whatever. But for me, being a Brummie is being part of somewhere very, very vibrant. I'm very active in the community. I'm a member of a writers group called Writers Without Borders, and that's a group that has it was originally set up for refugees, to give them a safe place to write when they were ready to write. But it now incorporates people from all walks of life, from all nationalities, who are not necessarily refugees. Some are and some are not. So I'm very active in that way, in the writing way. I'm a performance poet. So sometimes you might find me in a pub down Digbeth doing rude poems. Other times you might find me in the town hall doing skits. I did, for Positively Read, a friend and I did a drama performance there. So I'm kind of all over the country. I'm a writer performer. I'm a dramatist as well, so I write plays and have performed them across. This is where I see this is Birmingham spawned that, and this is where I see my children were born here. I was on parent-governor boards. I'd see people all over so I know a lot of people from different areas of my life, in a way that I don't think I would anywhere else. I know I bump into people who our children went to nurseries together. I'm kind of rooted and grounded here. And when I go back to Jamaica, I don't have the same. I would have to build that, and at some point or other I may go back, but I would have to build all that again. So to be Brummie for me is to be a part of the community, and it's to recognise that Birmingham has shaped who I am, because I've lived here the longest. Okay, yeah. This is a poem about coming to England. It's called Unaccompanied Minor, or Going It Alone. I think I'm going to burst. I think I'm going to burst. Tomorrow I'm going to England, going to the very best, leaving behind the worst. I think I'm going to burst. I think I'm going to burst. Going on an aeroplane, higher than the clouds, higher than the fluffy clouds. I think I'm going to burst. I think I'm going to burst. Don't know if I will sleep a wink. Wonder if I'll make a link with anyone in the clouds. I think I'm going to burst. I think I'm going to burst. Wake up, Aunt Bess is shaking me. Wake up, Lizzie. Wake up, Lizzie. It's time to get you ready. I think I'm going to burst. I think I'm going to burst. Pink dress with puffy sleeves, pink shoes with tiny heels, like English girls in magazines. I think I'm going to burst. I think I'm going to burst. Ma's Russell in his jollopy, he's taking Aunt Bess and me where they set the plains them free. I think I'm going to burst. I think I'm going to burst. Ma's Russell don't recognise me in all my frilly finery. No, he says, this can't be Lizzie. I think I'm going to burst. I think I'm going to burst. My village is just waking up. People boil their chocolate cup. Dogs watch the sun come up. I think I'm going to burst. I think I'm going to burst. Past all the villages like mine, past orange trees, guava and lime, June plum, ackee, moringa and pine. I think I'm going to burst. I think I'm going to burst. At the airport there's a sign, British Overseas Airways Corporation. Me and Aunt Bessie join the line. I think I'm going to burst. I think I'm going to burst. The lady in the red, white and blue says, how do you do? Is it just the two of you? I think I'm going to burst. I think I'm going to burst. No, Aunt Bessie's sounding funny. No, I don't have the money. She's going to her daddy and mummy. I think I'm going to burst. I think I'm going to burst. Unaccompanied minor, wait a while. The lady look at me and smile. My, don't you look pretty? I like your style. I think I'm going to burst. I think I'm going to burst. Time for you to say goodbye to your Aunt Bess. Now, no need to cry. It's time to go up in the sky. I think I'm going to burst. I think I'm going to burst. My heart is beating fast, fast, fast. I can't make my breath last. You coming, Aunt Bess? I ask. I think I'm going to burst. I think I'm going to burst. You're a big girl, Lizzie, and brave. You have to go. Mind, you behave. And remember to give me a wave. I think I'm going to burst. I think I'm going to burst. I fling my arms round Aunt Bessie's neck. I can't leave. Hold on like a rock, shaking like an earthquake aftershock. I think I'm going to burst. I think I'm going to burst. No, Aunt Bessie, no! No, I don't want to go. No, I don't want to go. No, Aunt Bessie, no. I don't want to go. I think I'm going to burst. I think I'm going to burst.
Predencia, how do you feel about telling your story?
I hadn't imagined it would be so emotional. There were things I remembered while I've been talking to you that I haven't thought about in years. Things like the children covering up the twigs. I don't even know where that memory came from. Things like I haven't talked about being called buffer jumper in so many years. So and the sniffing story, I haven't. These are memories that have been buried for a very long time, and there haven't been any need to bring them to the surface. So it's been a very emotional journey, an unexpectedly emotional journey.